Choosing a funeral home, what you need to know. Today I'm sitting with Anton Kaminsky from Kaminsky Law, and there are the unthinkable things that can happen when a loved one passes and you choose the wrong funeral home. Today we're going to talk about what you can do to avoid that. Anton, first, tell us a little bit about what are some of the things that you've run into that are these red flags and scary issues that people experience.
Sure. So we get a ton of calls about funeral homes. And the number one red flag that we see is people call about these, family-owned funeral homes or just one-person-owned funeral homes that have been around for not that long or that they keep changing hands. And the number one thing we do now when people call us with an issue, we'll absolutely hear your issue and see what's happening. But the question becomes collectability. Is if we sue this person and they really did do something horrible, is there anything to recover?
Let's talk about what horrible is. Just give me the list. What are the things that are these horror stories just, that you've seen clients run into?
Funeral home negligence, bunch of things, ranging from just, minor mix-ups to crazy things, right? Minor mix-ups is the service isn't ready on the time it's supposed to be, or the embalming isn't done by the day that it's supposed to be done. And so they try to, postpone or move things. A little bit crazier, a little bit more intense is you'll have, somebody get cremated before people had a chance to say goodbye, right? It is horrible. Sometimes you'll get somebody get cremated that wasn't supposed to be cremated. That's a lot more horrible.
Yep.
We've seen cases where the embalming just looks like it was done by somebody that has no idea what they're doing. So the person doesn't actually look like the person that was supposed to be.
So you're at the
embalmed.
viewing and you're
like, who's that in the casket?
Yeah.
There's been a lot of mix-ups. There's people that have had open caskets with somebody else's remains pulled out. There's been people that receive the wrong ashes after they've been cremated. They have somebody else's name tag in them. So funeral homes really do or can do a lot of negligent things. They can mess things up pretty badly. And we've seen a lot of different things, and you name it.
So I would say first, before we get into the collectability aspect, the one thing I would want to put a pin in is, what do you do if you suspect any of these things, right? You're standing over the casket and you're looking. Most people hopefully have not experienced many funerals, right? So you might be looking and going, well, this embalmment doesn't look anything like my loved one, but is that what it's supposed to be? So I would say that, if you are feeling something could be wrong, right? Say something, right? Is that kind of the
document? Okay. It's very, at least in my culture, it's not, typical that people would take pictures at a funeral, right? That's not, that's not something you want to photograph. But if something is so bad that you're like, oh my God, this is horrible, take a picture of it.
Yeah.
Because, make a video of it, because later it's going to be he said, she said. Write a text message, write an email. Writing a text message or an email does work, but then somebody responds and says it wasn't that way. And now it's still he said, she said. So if you see something that's like horrible, take a picture in the moment. That's the number one thing you can do.
I think it's just empathetically to think about the fact that, hopefully most people have not experienced many funerals in this situation. Hopefully, and probably when they're in this situation, you're so emotional already with everything that's going on. I imagine it's hard to trust your gut. It's hard to know what to do in those situations. And so, I don't know that somebody even has the presence of mind to watch something like this before, this God forbid moment, right? Where they're burying somebody and prepare themselves, right? But you really need to, because, if you have that preparation, you're going to have the things in place to do the things that will help you potentially collect and get justice if there's a situation.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of people see our videos after something's went wrong. If I can make a video for people that are planning a funeral or planning some sort of, burial, cremation, whatever it may be, the number one thing I would say is look into the funeral home you're about to use and look into the people that own the funeral home. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Speaking solely for Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, you could search the Philadelphia court dockets. You could search for judgments. You could search to see if this funeral home already has judgments against
Give me
it.
that like I'm a fifth grader. Where do I go? How do I do it? Do you have the details there?
Yeah. So I don't have the exact website. Maybe we'll put it in a link on this video.
Okay.
But you would basically search for Philadelphia docket search or Bucks County docket search. Insert your county docket search. And a lot of times just seeing the list of the different cases, that's free. If you want to pull individual, case filings, that costs money.
Okay.
But just seeing.
But am I just looking at a general list of everything that's going on or everything that's happened, and then I have to, seek and find the funeral home's name and see if they ever came up?
Yeah, it's like a search engine.
Okay.
And so what I would suggest is that people go on, like if you're in Philadelphia and you're watching this video, Philadelphia has a very very simple to use docket search, and it's also a judgment search. So docket is like, hey, if there's a lawsuit going on, you can kind of see all the proceedings. And to a regular person, that might be pretty confusing. The judgment search is a lot easier.
And judgment is just for lay people.
Now, this person lost in court, and there's been a monetary award awarded against them. And you could actually search that.
Amazing.
And so in Philadelphia, we've seen this issue where somebody uses a funeral home. They call us. The thing that happened is horrible. We search the docket and the judgments for that funeral home and that individual, and they already owe the IRS $500,000, and they already owe some other people hundreds of thousands of dollars for cases that they've already lost. And so we're not going to sue them. We're not going to, especially on a contingency, right? Because a lot of lawyers on these kinds of cases, they work on a percentage of what you're going to recover. And so we're just not going to take that case on, because then we know that even if we win, we won't get paid, right? And so, it dissuades lawyers, for better or worse. I mean, that might be a horrible thing to say, but lawyers don't want to put in their time and effort and work into a case where they're not going to get anything. So when you're looking at these funeral home cases, you're looking at, will this funeral home have insurance for this? And you're looking at whether or not this person is going to be what we call judgment proof, because, somebody that already owes $500,000 to somebody, or multitude of people, what's another 50, 100, 200 grand?
Right, but they can't pay it anyway. And
they're not paying it.
And I agree with you. I know you said like that might sound horrible that an attorney's not going to take that job, but the reality is that that's your work, right? For the person that has sustained damages, that has gone through this horrific situation, on their end, you're just telling them the news that they're going to find out anyway, which is you can't recover because we didn't do our due diligence up front to make sure that this is a sustained business that's following best practices.
Sure. And the thing is, what can you do in advance, right?
Yeah.
And in advance, there's really two simple things that you can do. And it's, it could be bottled down really simply. Number one, search for the funeral home that you are going to use. Search for them on Google, search for them on social media. Don't just look at what they publish, look at what's published about them, right? Because there's going to be articles about, places that screw up a lot. Number two, search the local county that they're physically located in, search the judgments and the dockets and see if you find lawsuits. Listen, maybe there's a bunch of lawsuits against them and you just don't want to use them for that reason. Who cares what the lawsuits are about? Right. And then number three, a little bit more complicated, is do they have insurance, right? And we've talked about this insurance thing 1,000 times, but if a funeral home has slip and fall insurance, which means if you fall on their premises, you could sue for your physical harm. But if they don't have funeral negligence insurance or funeral director's insurance, they're not going to have coverage for something that they screw up as funeral directors.
And this insurance is not mandated by the state that these.
No, it's unfortunate. And I wanted to do a whole separate video about this and maybe even go to like local governments. But I've actually talked to a couple of people in the press about this kind of thing. It's interesting because it's very analogous, and I don't want to get off topic, but into the dram shop issues, right?
Okay.
So for instance, there's a lot of bars that also don't have to have insurance for what happens if you leave there drunk and get into an accident, right? So that's from my understanding, and again, I'm not an expert on this,
right,
but it's a similar kind of thing. Like, yeah, as a bar, you want to have this insurance so that if you get sued, you don't go bankrupt, right? And as a funeral home, you want to have this kind of insurance so if you get sued, you don't go bankrupt,
Right.
but there's nothing mandating this type of insurance. And so, unfortunately, the way that it works out is that just some people have no recourse.
Yeah. And that's what it comes down to. I think in this episode, what we really want to cover and made sure we cover down on is you as your responsibility, unfortunately, because there isn't a mandate around this insurance and these best practices, is do your due diligence. And you gave the list of the ways you can do that to just do what you can to make sure that this funeral home is following best practice, that if God forbid there is a mistake being made, and I would assume most likely that you would be able to recover. And I would assume most likely the other part of it, if you do your due diligence and you see that they're following best practices, they're more likely to not be making these mistakes.
Absolutely. And I'll say, the one thing that I see all the time is when something happens, right, there's this urgency to plan a funeral. There's this urgency to get a burial and to get, everything done. Slow down a little bit, right? Just go talk to maybe more than one funeral home, because a lot of these individuals that we see, they're pretty seedy. You kind of get the vibe from them that they're not
Doing things
correctly. They're real quick to get your money. Hey, Venmo me instead of writing me a check.
Interesting. Okay.
A lot of different things like that.
Hit me with that really quick. What are some of those other maybe details that you see in these cases that are the, red flags, let's say, right? CD is a tough thing to describe. That's a feeling you get from somebody, right? But like Venmo me right away for a deposit versus, providing me a check and fill it, right? That goes two ways. Maybe the funeral home's going to say, well, we have a lot of people that checks bounce and things like that.
Sure.
And there's time.
Sure.
So there's an understanding there that like you want the transfer of funds, but you can see what are those things that you see that are kind of like red flags?
So some red flags that I see is, number one, it's a tiny funeral home somewhere in, a house or a basement. It's not its own kind of like establishment. Number two, those people are really short with you. They're like, hey, you're either going to pay me or leave me alone. Number three is, they're asking for all sorts of weird payments, pay me cash, pay me Venmo. Look, I get it. Check might bounce, but also if the check bounces, they might still not perform the service. So, you have time, right? Another thing is it's just one guy that's selling you, that isn't necessarily the name on the door. He isn't necessarily the funeral director. It's the company's called one thing, but you're dealing with somebody else.
Mismatching names.
Yeah.
That's a great one.
People aren't picking up the phone when you call, or they're not returning your calls, or you try to put something in writing. They try to call you in response to the writing. Like they don't want to put anything in writing. I lost count of the numbers, but there's a lot of these kinds of just personable things. If you feel a weird personable kind of issue vibe, you're probably right, because as humans, we're pretty good at telling these things in our gut. And then the other thing is, you have these big established funeral homes. I don't want to name any names, but there's funeral homes that are kind of like a chain. It'll be like, somebody's name is used at a bunch of multiple funeral homes. Those are going to be more likely to be legitimate businesses with legitimate insurance. If they're not giving you price lists, if they're just kind of wheeling and dealing and telling you, well, you got to have this and this and this, and they don't say like, here's our standard price list. They're just telling you, they're making up a
great one. Yeah.
There's a lot of red flags. And again, slow down. Don't just necessarily, sign with the first person you talk to, because if they're pressuring you and rushing you to just, okay, agree, put down the deposit, make the payment, that's a red flag in and of itself.
I think those are great tips that again, I think to put yourself in folks' shoes that are going through this. You're emotional, you're trying to get this done, you're trying to do the right things. There's probably a lot of other things on your plate. And so this is a great list to just kind of keep in the back of your mind and say, hey, if you're starting to feel these things, you notice one thing on the list, 2, 3, all of a sudden, there's something that's jumping out of you, and don't ignore that feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think this is super helpful, Anton. I think we've really called out some of the red flags that you can look out for in funeral homes that might lead to negligence. We've also looked at in this episode what the problems are and why there wouldn't be recourse, and what you can do to vet that potential vendor to make sure they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, and the one thing I'd add is, let's say a funeral home does mess something up, sometimes if they're willing to resolve it with you, that's absolutely a conversation that you can have. Um, I would suggest that you call a lawyer. I would suggest that you kind of, vet it through a lawyer, because you want to talk to somebody that deals with this a lot before you sign anything or before you give away any rights, because sometimes you might have a really good case and they might have insurance, but they don't want to go through insurance. And they're like, well, we'll just give you your $5,000 back. Can we be done? And you might actually have a really good case, but you've now signed away all your rights, and now a lawyer won't help you because you've signed away all your rights.
So that's a great last bit. I would say talk to the funeral home just like anybody else. You're dealing with any business, right? Businesses make mistakes. It's good to talk to them to see if they're willing to remedy it and how they're willing to handle it. But you want to make sure that you're not being misguided. So have an attorney look it over and make sure that they see those pathways. So again, if you see something, trust your gut, say something. These best practices, I think, are going to really help. And I think most importantly, and probably both agree, hopefully, if God forbid you're dealing with a situation like this, you're not dealing with a funeral home that's taking advantage, and you just have a good experience where you can get closure. And I think that,
Yeah.
and I think we wish that for everybody.
That is the goal. And the goal is that none of this happens to you.